Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Geopolitics with Tyberius D, where today we're going to be talking about a nation that's been really in the news lately. You may have noticed that earlier this week, Germany had a massive election, which is one of the biggest things that's happened is politically there in the last 20 years. Angela Merkel had already decided to step down and try to pass it off to somebody else to run the CDU and basically run Germany. However, why is it that the last 3 or 4 times she's actually tried to do this in her 16-year tenure, that no one wanted to run the CDU in Germany? Today we're going to get the secret look under the hood at what's actually going on in Germany and why no one actually wants to rule the most powerful country in Europe. Roll the intro. Okay, I'm debating on actually getting a more of a clickbaity title for this one when it comes to the upload. So if it's just Country Spotlight Germany, we'll stick with the old thing. But we might do Why No One Wants to Rule Germany. So I'm actually deciding on that right now as we're recording. Either which way, yes, today we're talking about Germany. But before I do, I've got to shout out to my patrons and my sponsors because they make this all happen and make this all better. So, Fallenor, Andy Wagner, The West Dude, Julia, Ron Cleveland, Drew, Ace Man, Kamikaze, Samantha Banana, Leah, Revolt Rise, and Shadow Fox. All of you have been absolutely wonderful, and I appreciate it so much that you guys have helped me out through all of this, whether it's been a little bit or a lot of bit. So many have absolutely been great to me. And I want to actually add one more onto this. A guy who's been helping me out a lot. He's not technically on the patrons list yet, but he's been working his way up there. Fader Mephistus. I apologize, can't get that right exactly, but he's been dropping a couple of dollars here and there almost every stream that we've had, and I really thank you very much for helping me. So without further ado, let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Germany, most powerful country in all of Europe. Basically the epicenter, as I put it in the country history episode last time. We'll see if that changes. It's powerful. It's strong. It's largely unified. And now it's had a major election, which right now the negotiations are going on to see where it goes. We'll talk about that in the politics section. What's going on in Germany right now that determines where it is and why and what's going on? Well, geography. Let's get into that real quick. We'll talk about the climate first and foremost, as we always do. The climate's not terrible, but it's not great either. Looking into the green zones on this map, what you are looking at is areas that are known as the temperate wet zones. And this is largely what you see on the Atlantic seaboard, largely between Richmond and New York. If you want that kind of general weather, this is also what we largely see in southern England, and particularly England in general. This is that rain belt that kind of flushes over northern Europe and brings heat and an ample amount of water for a long growing season. However, it's generally cloudy in this region, and it doesn't shine that much, which is why their solar program's having so much trouble. The areas that are actually green on this map are largely areas, in a nutshell, that get a lot of rain, not so much sun, but do grow a significant amount of crop and a decent amount of wind. And so, in a general sense this is pretty good for building out an agricultural industrial base for what we've seen. We'll talk about the elevation here shortly. The blue on the map is the cold area. Now, this isn't too much different from the temperate area that you see on the map. It just generally gets colder the more inland in Europe you go. Most of the heat that you get into northern England or southern England and northern France and into Holland, by the time it's getting into Germany, it's significantly losing its oomph. Remind you that all of Europe is at the same latitude same latitude as Canada, and it's significantly warmer in Europe, and that is because of the Atlantic current that is driving heat from the Caribbean and from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up into the northern Atlantic and dumping a crap ton of heat, which turns into rain and precipitation and heat that goes off into the continent. Middle of Germany, that's where it largely loses a lot of its oomph, and it starts getting colder, particularly as you go into Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. And so this is where the first phase of it largely ends. So the northwest part of the country, largely pretty good as far as an industrialized state. The central part isn't too bad either. And you get into the east, it's got some issues, but it's not horrible. But if you're talking about where Germany's true core is, of where their peoples flourish the most, it's in these green areas. This is the Rhineland, this is North Rhine-Westphalen, this is the area that used to be known as Saxony, which is now known as Lower Saxony, and you get up into Schleswig-Holstein. These areas, really powerful, really good at generating a modern economic system, and the blue areas aren't terrible either. If you see anything else on those other areas, there's a little bit of Germany there in the center, where East and West Germany used to meet. That doesn't get a lot of rain for some reason. It's weird. I can't explain why that happens, but if you see the other dark blue and polar regions, that's just because of the Alps down in the south, so you don't have to worry about that too terribly much. Moving on to getting into the geography here. This is a topographical map. You guys know how this generally works. The different color, the less green it is, the more elevated it is, and of course the more that it changes, the worse it is, because that means that you have a significant change in elevation that predominates what is going on here. And if you're changing elevation, that means you've got hills and steep gradients, which is hard to build roads and interconnectivity through. I know I've usually expanded upon this significantly much before, but anyway, what largely is here is that Germany in the north is relatively flat. It's easy to connect, and you have railroads and highways and the Autobahn that absolutely unites us into a network. And when you get into central Germany, although it's hilly and it has some problems, is that it's kind of like dealing with areas like Tennessee. In particular around Nashville. It's pretty hilly, but it's not horrible. You can integrate it into the network. Southern Germany is where it gets a little wonky. There's certain parts of it that are relatively flat, such as the Rhine Valley, and certain areas of Bavaria that kind of plateau out into a general area that you can interconnect with. But there are barriers of limitation. The old Fulda Gap, as an example, which was a meme during the Cold War, in reality is one of those choke points that really is hard to get through. Either everything is focused into that point, or in general, everything wants to get away from it. And so when you're getting into largely the area that is now, or one of the areas that is Anhalt-Saxony or Thurga, is that these areas are a lot more hilly, a lot more mountainous, or not hilly, excuse me, they're a lot more hilly, and they're a lot more, I don't know what the word is, I apologize. The changes in elevation are a lot more drastic. You largely just like walk from hill to hill to hill, and it's very, very more consistent. And so just to show you that map one more time, the area that we're talking about here, largely in this central area here, right there, that largely splits the north and the south. You get these lower areas here that are actually a lot more flat and a lot more suitable. But right there in the middle of the country, there's this general like barrier that keeps everything from being united. You either have to go through it, which is really hard, or more likely around it, which is actually what most of the continent does, or of the country does. So, without further ado, that largely ends us on, it's not necessarily steps, but it does have a topography very similar to that. And bringing back into the climate map here, which I'll show you one more time, there is an arid steppe region, but it's actually quite a bit more north of that. Remind you that the steppe is actually a flatter area that usually borders the mountain ranges, not necessarily areas that is the mountain ranges. And to give you an example, the area of the steppe is Nebraska and Colorado all the way up to Denver. Then you start getting into the mountainous areas. Okay, cool. Hopefully that takes care of that pretty well. Wes Dude, it's always good to see you. I appreciate you being here, and of course appreciate your patronage as always. All right, so that largely takes care of the geography. It's relatively decent geography, has some problems, but it does facilitate a modern nation state with its large area of temperate climate, ample access to largely flat lands and rivers. All right, fair enough, man. Thank you for stopping by. I appreciate that. All right, so the next thing we got to get into is the demography, and this is where everything starts going to hell in a handbasket for our German friends. If you want a reason why the German people, or basically no one wants to run Germany anymore, this is it. Germany has a massive social welfare system that has been built out upon a large and ample working class that pays the taxes, runs the machines, and is very technically skilled. And that is the people there between 55 and 65 that you see on this particular graph. Here's the problem. Whenever they're gone, all of that goes away. Your workforce retires, your tax base shrinks by a third, and all of a sudden, Germany, being one of the most prosperous and wealthy countries in the world, suddenly isn't Germany anymore. At least not in the Germany that we're used to for the last 20 years. Not to say that this is the end of Germany, but in a general sense, it's the end of Germany. Now, there's two folds to this. One of them that we won't talk about, this largely gets into the economics, so we're going to parallel into this pretty quickly, is that this all has an economic outcome. Germany is a nation of 80 million people. It is one of the most populous in Europe. Yes. Good to see you, North Countryman. Thank you for stopping by. All right, cool. German demography is, as again, it's a little shot because you've got a large working contingent of people between 55 and 65, but they're all retiring within the next 10 years. You don't have the people to replace them, and so the social safety nets are going to be strained. Being able to maintain a balanced central government is going to be a lot harder, and until basically what is the equivalent of the German boomers eventually die off, very similar to the American ones, is that they are going to dominate the political entity of Germany while not being a part of its economic infrastructure anymore. And that is going to strain the German economy and strain the German political system to its absolute limit, especially if you're younger and you feel like you're getting screwed. Das Boomers, yeah. Okay, so that's part one. Part two is this. All of those people who are in the ages between 55 and 65, or if you will, more between the ages of 50 and 60, depending on which numbers you're looking at. For some reason, it looks a little different on screen. Largely, between 50 and 65 is where the vast majority of the boomers are. So in this 15-year gap, right? They don't have the kids to consume all of the things that they are making. So they're absolute craftsmen. There's a reason why you have German cars and German technological wonders of whatever you are making. All the products that come out of Germany are absolutely massive in their quality. And it's why this country is now a country that largely is between 40 and 50% of its economy is exports. Exports! Holy crap. Okay, what I'm getting here is this. They don't have the kids to consume all the things they're making. Now, that's not a bad thing in a world that is interconnected. But now we have COVID. COVID has largely put the brakes on a lot of these things. And while the German economy is still holding strong to a large degree, because no one can sever the ties immediately, in a world that looks like COVID won't be gone for most of Europe and for the next year, that bodes pretty badly. But that's not the worst case scenario here. The second part is that eventually all of these people are going to retire, and that will largely happen over the next 10 years. When that happens, the entire technological know-how of what most of these people can do, their throughput capabilities, and their ability to generate economic growth is going to completely invert. They're now going to be an economic drain on the country, not an economic benefit to the country. And so you're going to watch Germany, that has largely been one of the most prosperous countries within Europe, suddenly jump off a cliff, or economically and demographically speaking, to where they don't have enough people to continue running the export machine while also maintaining the technological know-how and the social safety net to provide for the people who came before them. And so basically, Germany, in a nutshell, is at an end. But here's one more thing I have to get into while we're on the economics and the political front, because everything's all interconnected here. Germany has largely said since World War II, we're not going to arm, we're not going to do largely any of this stuff because, one, we're basically a client state of the Americans, and two, we don't really want to go back to that. We're all interconnected, we're all interdependent. It's a wonderful time to be German and European, and it's great. Here's the issue. Germany is exporting so much that even with the entire European Union all on one front, that's only about half the market that they need. A lot of this goes into other nations across the world, largely being actually the United States. Is that a significant amount of these exports are actually purchased by the Americans, and as part of their technological front. Now, this is actually a really good trade relationship for the United States and Germany to have, because they largely on the same general tech level and standard of living level where they can be competitive without undermining each other. And that's a good relationship to have. Germany also buys a lot of American goods, but let's not act like it's a one-way relationship. Here's the other issue, though. The United States has been the security guarantor and the economic guarantor for Germany. And so Germany hasn't had to defend itself against the Soviet Union or anyone who might want to pick a fight with it here in the modern era. Germany doesn't have an army to a large degree. It's about 100,000 dudes. Literally, the treaty implications imposed on them after World War I, they've now done by default. And so no one's equipped. While Germany has a very robust arms industry, most of it's for export. The Leopard 2, there's more Leopard 2s outside of Germany than there is inside of Germany. They've got a number of wonderful weapon systems that absolutely kick ass, but they're more of an export-driven arms industry that has either become integrated into the larger European arms industry that's kind of formed out, particularly with their Rheinmetall's buying or purchase of Royal Ordnance, as an example. Is that basically the Europeans have kind of put their arms industry into one net. And so in a world that's becoming a lot more isolationist and nationalistic, Germany has some questions to make. Because in the event that somebody challenges their security, or more importantly, somebody threatens their security, and that is in an economic fashion, which we haven't got to yet, Germany might have to rearm. And that's going to be dangerous for a Europe that is scared shitless of a strong and central Germany. So let's get into the economics real quick here as we break this down. So, excuse me, want to make sure I got the right slide here. This is Germany's GDP. Now, if you guys don't remember, the green line is what was reported as the nominal GDP. The blue line is what that would be adjusted in today for inflation, or just today inflation. For some reason, these colors don't go through well. The very dark green, which is usually the bottom one, is purchasing power parity. And of course, the one above that is adjusted for inflation. 2020 obviously brought a recession due to COVID. And to some degree, they were already going into one in 2019 because of climate issues. And also, they're already having struggles with maintaining their economic system in the regards that they've got all of these older people, but no one who is young enough to purchase their loans and largely keep the financial system afloat. And so Deutsche Bank, which is one of the best run institutions in the world, would you advise Germany to spend a higher percentage of their GDP on military? We'll get there. We'll definitely get there. And I'll answer that. Okay, so anyway, the problem with the demography that we were talking about earlier is that if you have no one to make or to borrow money from the older people, your banking system basically goes into free fall. And this is what we've seen throughout most of the Eurozone, and particularly in Germany. Germany has been experimenting with negative interest rates. And it's not because Germany isn't good at banking, it's just the entire banking system has largely become inverted. The good news is that they're largely being able to maintain a decent standard of living. We are talking about a nation that in pure numbers is still averaging in American dollars over $45,000 a year. It's not a bad standard of living across the world. And if we're talking about purchasing power parity, again, take that with a grain of salt because it's never quite solid. You're probably talking about a nation that's actually around $50,000 a year because they've been able to metagame the euro in such a way where their exports are really easy to come or to put out on the open market while also gaining imports that allowed them to sustain a higher quality of living. And so Germany is actually handling this kind of thing pretty decently well. And so here's the rub. Okay, because this gets into the politics and it gets into the military, because the military is always our last part. The economics are that Germany's heyday is coming to an end, one way or another. And this is why every time that Merkel tried to step down over the last 5 to 6 years, no one wanted to take her job, or the moment that they realized what was going on within Germany, everyone's like, nope, I'm out, peace out. There's been 3 people that have actually been put up to take over the CDU and possibly the chancellorship when Merkel would step down. And she finally had to force the issue. I don't care anymore. I'm leaving because I don't want to be here when this is all said and done. There's a reason why Merkel, which is a wonderful person, stepped down still during the COVID crisis, because she doesn't want to be that person that is remembered as a chancellor where everything went to shit. Because the reality of the matter is that Germany may never recover from COVID. By the time that they're done with COVID, they may be able to recover a little bit, but we're getting into the end of the era as far as isolationism and a free trade and a world that is able to take in German goods. In the event that that happens, the Germans are at the end anyway. So we might not even have to wait the full 10 years for the German workforce to retire. We might only have to wait 2 or 3 before people start going, I can't buy your goods, Germany. I'm worrying about my own kind of thing. And so, as far as a general level, we have a serious problem to concern with when it comes to the German economy, and that is forcing massive conversations within Germany's political system. So, let's talk about that. There's not a lot of nations I know the in-depth workings of the political systems of, but if there's any country that I feel secondly good qualified with, absolutely, Sweet Tea, you've actually nailed that. If there's any country I feel that I actually have a decent grasp on what's going on, it's actually Germany, and that's because, ich spreche Deutsche. Kleine Deutsche. Anyway. Been trying to learn German, trying to involve myself, and I always had a fascination with Germany because it's had a very interesting history. We'll check that out on the next episode when we record that, or whenever that goes up in the country histories, because those are always so much fun for me. I love the German episodes. All right, cool. So, without further ado, I want to get into, Deutschland, yeah. Okay, so, I got to stop memeing here for a second. So, the economics are in threat, and with the economics coming in threat, the political system and the military system become in threat. What's going on in the politics? Well, right now, Merkel has had one of the highest approval ratings of any leader throughout the world, and that's largely because she is a centrist candidate that largely understands how the country runs, how everything works. She's not an idiot. Now, the only problem that we talked about, and this goes back to an episode way back when we talked to our good friend Ted52, is that her only major flaw is that she's kind of aged, and she may or may not understand how things like the internet work, and so the Germans are trailing behind when it comes to telecommunications of the 21st century. But if we're talking about industrial capacity, we're talking about economic doctrine, we're talking about social policy, the Germans, with a combination government of the CDU and the SPD, have had a coalition or a grand coalition government that has been kicking ass and taking names as far as administrating and getting people the basic goods and services they need to have a strong and functioning economy. The problem is Merkel knows that with COVID and all this is now completely under threat, and she doesn't want to be there holding the bag when everything goes to shit. And this isn't political expediency. She just knows that there's no way to win. And so this is somebody else's job. So, right now, where we're at is that the Germans are in the conversation of who is going to rule. Now, there's a number of possibilities. They can reboot the Grand Coalition, but the SPD is going to be in charge instead of the CDU, with the CDU backing them. I actually strongly recommend this for the Germans because the SPD and the CDU have the relationships to maintain a strong central government that, excuse me, thanks for the haircut, yeah. They have a strong central government that has competency, has business relations that can go kick ass. Okay, traffic light. I'll talk that. The next one is a left-wing government known as Traffic Light. That is a combination of the SPDs, Red, the FDP, the FPD, can't remember. It's a liberal party, largely a market liberal party that is more libertarian-esque in its nature. There's some quibbles there, but I don't want to get into it. It usually pulls about 10% of the voter base, about 11. They could be part of it, and also the Greens. So, red and yellow, green. The Greens are the progressive party of Germany to a large degree outside of Der Linke. And Der Grune is become a massive party into its own right and is now rivaling the SPD. If I was an SPD voter, I absolutely would see that as a threat, and I wouldn't ever want to legitimize the Greens by bringing them into a coalition. On the other side of that, if you actually want a left-wing coalition government, that is the way to do it. And so that is a proposed coalition that is on the table. I will be very interested to see where this goes, but as far as that is right now, that's one of the coalitions. There's a few other ones. There's one called Germany, which is basically the Grand Coalition plus the FDP, just to kind of shore it up because the Grand Coalition right now with its current voter numbers just barely pulls it over. Jamaica, yes. I got to remember what that one is. I forget what that coalition color is. Cicero, please remind me of what parties that is real quick. Because, yeah. Traffic Light, Jamaica, Kenya, Germany coalition. Yeah. Some of them are interesting how they all did these, and they're nice. Yellow, green, and black. Right. Okay, so, oh yeah. One of the weirder combinations with that was the idea that you would get the CDU, the Greens, and the FDP together, and you would ignore the SPD. I don't see the CDU actually ever doing that. And the SPD is the biggest party in the country, and if that were to happen, holy crap. Yeah, I'm not seeing that one coming. You've got, I think, Kenya, which I already talked about. The Germany coalition, which I already talked about. So, a large degree, there's a lot of options on the floor. There's a lot of options on the table for this country to put together a governing coalition. Personally, I would either go with the Grand Coalition continuing, and the SPD needs to be able to show its voters, and particularly the left-wingers of the country, that they are the liberal party or the left-wing party, and that they can run the show with the CDU as the left-wing extension in Germany. I think that's the way to go forward. Now, I have no idea what they're actually going to do. We could see traffic light, we could see all these things, but I'm going to be honest, if traffic light actually does form, I don't expect it to survive very long. I'll be shocked if it survives 18 months, because the Greens are very much like the American progressives in a lot of ways. They're very much hardliners in the regards that they don't like to compromise that much. So if the Greens feel like they're not going to get what they want, they will ditch that coalition in a heartbeat. And so, yeah. But after 12 of the 16 years of the Green Coalition, people are tired of it. They absolutely are, which is why the Greens and the SPD split the vote share almost equally between what people left of the CDU. And I'm not going to say that new change isn't needed, but I think the right call here for the SPD is to show, look, the Grand Coalition is still powerful, it's still capable, and we can get shit done. Vote SPD. And I think that's literally what the play is here. But again, I've already made that complaint. All right, cool. Sweet Tea did question the military, so let's move into there for the final segment. Oh my gosh. The German military is a wet paper bag. Unironically, the treaty that was made after World War I to basically defang Germany, the Germans have done to themselves, particularly after the end of the Cold War. The German standing army is somewhere around 100,000 men, depending on what year it is. Sometimes it gets down to 85,000. Sometimes it's up to about 145,000. They have got a small navy, but it's not really necessary or necessary. Just a couple of Type-212s, which are really good submarines. Don't get me wrong, but excuse me. Their military capabilities are decent, but they don't have a lot of military capabilities. Their land military is small, but it has really good weapon systems, such as the Puma, which I believe is the IFV. They've got the Leopard 2, A7, which is a wonderful main battle tank, even though it's got the shot trap in there, but we'll ignore that. It's equipped with Eurofighter Typhoons and Tornadoes, and while it's nowhere near as good as the American Air Force as far as quality or quantity, it's not bad. You also have the German Navy, which is a couple of destroyers and a couple of frigates, and, honestly, they've continued their submarine tradition to a large degree. They don't have any nuclear submarines to my knowledge, but what they definitely do have is some really good diesel-electric boats that are really nasty. The Type 212 is no joke, and it's quiet, it's maneuverable, and it's small. And so it's got a lot of bang for its buck. Suffice it to say, here's the problem. In a Germany that has to deal with an economic upheaval and a political upheaval, we've seen what happens when this happens before. Germany was an economic disaster come 1934, but come 1940 was invading France. If Germany decides to, in the next couple of years, we have to secure our future. We still have this educated workforce that can build highly technological, highly proficient, highly active goods and weapon systems. They might do it. And you can watch that even though Germany has a smaller population power man pool than they've ever had, is that they can build the weapon systems to supplant them in a way that makes a German army very strong, very capable, and very lethal. I'm going to reference our good friend Mr. Zion on this one. This is one of his particular theories, and I haven't got the chance to read the actual book there. So if I'm agreeing with him on anything, I haven't gotten a chance to actually work through his theories, because this is supposed to be in Disunited Nations. I have it, but I haven't read it. Okay. Zion believes that Germany is going to go into Eastern Europe, not as a conqueror, but as a defender. They're going to unite with the Czech Republic, with Poland, and whatnot, to basically integrate into a kind of economic defensive pact that allows them to all maintain a general standard of living, reinforce each other's geopolitical interests, and do okay. Russia is working its way west in the same regard. And the problem is that if I've got the idea right from his talks, is that they're going to clash. I don't 100% agree with this, actually. This is more for the future episode, but we'll definitely talk about this in a general nutshell. I do believe that Germany may very well want to tie its relationship to Poland. But what we're actually seeing right now is that Germany is actually kind of doing a Molotov-Ribbentrop pact all over again. Germany and Russia have been getting a lot closer the last couple of years, and while Germany is still largely allegiant to the United States, is that they've definitely brought that into question. There was a scandal back in 2017 where we basically showed that we were listening in on all their communiques and whatnot, and it pissed off the Germans. Weird part is, everyone does that anyway, so, nah. What really is important here is Nord Stream 2, and the economic political relationship with Russia. Russia and Germany basically are at very similar spots right now. They're both kind of on their last leg, and they're both kind of dying as functioning entities in the way that they operate right now. So they have a lot of commonality. Does that mean we'll see Poland ripped apart once again? Actually, a little bit more possible than people give credit for. But that also means the world in which NATO and all these institutions are gone. Not yet. They're not there yet. But in a world that is becoming a lot more insular, a lot more nationalistic, and particularly a world that is not led by the Americans, or at least doesn't want to be led by the Americans, NATO could be gone in a few years. And we literally could blink and it'd just be gone. I actually expect this, if this is going to happen, it'll be under the next American president. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, so here's the real part that I think is actually the concern here. Zion has largely been talking about a final confrontation between the Russians and the Germans, and eventually they'd bleed each other out dead. I don't expect that, actually. I think there's a risk of it, but if anyone is actually liable to go to war and defend themselves, or basically go into a geopolitical confrontation over the future of Europe, it's Germany and France. Because in a world where Germany is on the decline, France is not. And the France has been looking to secure its interests for the better part of the last 900 years. And no matter what changes we've seen the French go through, in a general sense, what has happened with France is that, let me get to chat here in just a second. What has largely happened regarding France is that in the trajectory that they're still going, they're not likely to change in a particular way that they're going to decline. They still have one of the better population demographics of Europe, and while we don't know the ethnic breakdown of that, we definitely know that it's largely younger, it's more educated, it's more equipped compared to a lot of other demographies throughout most of Western Europe. And France never let go of some of its political empire that it made during its colonial era. While Western Africa has declared independence to a large degree, France has largely been able to maintain political and economic controls over its former colonies in a very hands-off way. And so, to a large degree, what I actually see is that Germany needs markets and it needs resources. France has that to a large degree, and it is their biggest geopolitical competitor in a world where France and Germany don't agree. The question is, will they? So, we're going to have to talk about this in the future episode, but the country spotlight for this, Germany is in decline, or is about to be in decline. And it's going to be pretty rapid, and they're going to have to make very rapid decisions on how they're going to do things. Now, they could go for the United Europe scheme, where they try to make the United States of Europe. That is possible, still. Because largely the French and the Germans are, at least under Merkel and Macron, have largely been on the same page regarding European policy. That might change with the new leadership. We're going to find out. If a world becomes a lot more insular, where France has a Le Pen and Germany has somebody that's just trying to hold down, Germany could very rapidly look at a world where they're not on the same page with anybody else again. And we've seen what happens when a Germany gets that way. If you guys start seeing the AfD and the CDU rapidly gaining, actually no, we'll put it this way. If you guys see the Lenka and the AfD rapidly gaining in votership in the next 5 years, you'll know that everything's been going to shit and basically Germany's preparing for a radical conclusion. I hope that's not the case, of course, but usually whenever people's wallets come on the line and people's standards of living come on the line, the politics go right out the window with it. And so that is my greatest fear. And that is if the EU isn't there, this basically Germany has to go it alone, and Germany will rearm very quickly. It will become politically unstable, and you will see basically the 1930s on repeat, but instead of happening in 10 years, it'll be 5, if that. And the Germans will do everything they can to secure their future, because they're Germans. And without further ado, I'm going to end the episode on that. Well, I'll talk about a little bit what's going on in chat, because I know you guys have questions, and that's fine. But a lot of this will be answered in the History and Futures episode that'll be recorded later on. And so I thank you all for being here. So let's tag out chat a little bit and get everybody. Germany triangulates its relationship with right-wing governments in East, Russia, Poland, Ukraine. True. They try to basically maintain that the CDU is the grandfather of the right wing without Europe, and they're trying to keep everybody in check. And so they're trying to build out some pretty decent relationships with Unity Russia. That's been really hit or miss. And the Poland Grand Coalition of the right now has been straining the relationship because they've been absolutely hardliners against some human rights. And I'm trying not to be political here, but the abortion conversation within Poland is making a lot of people go, whoa. And of course, also with COVID, Poland has also put in a lot of emergency measures that question how democratic Poland's becoming. And so this is going to be very interesting to see where that relationship goes. And so you might, for the time having been, you had a better relationship with Poland and Germany than we've ever had. But that relationship is at threat of going into breakdown very quickly. So the EU could take its place as a Commonwealth-like entity. Not necessarily true or untrue. Here's the thing that they have. They've got a common trade. They've got a common trade area, and they've got a common movement of peoples, right? The Schengen area. That's not a bad thing. What is the problem here is that they don't have a political and economic system that is completely united here in the way that they need to be. You need to have, in all extents, a United States of Europe. You need the EU government, if it's going to survive as a functioning entity, is going to have to be able to impose basically a common order among everybody, so that when Germany or France wants this, largely they'll be treated as an American state. Yes, you can have that. No, you can't have that. We're the final authority. Piss off. And you're going to have a government that looks a lot more like the United States federal government for the European Union for this to survive as an entity. The problem is with the United States, not only did we have to go through a revolution to even get that kind of government, which the Europeans have slowly built out over the last 70 years, but when it took between the independence of the states and the independence of the federal government, we had to go to a civil war for it. And we largely, whether it was a slow accretion of power or a slow accretion of power or a general trend in emergency measures, is that the United States built up a sovereign unitary government under the federal government that now is the supreme power among the United States. And Europe, if it's going to survive as a functional entity, the European Union is going to have to go the same route. Last time the Americans did that was a civil war. So yeah, I'm just saying this. The Europeans are going to do that. That's going to be a massive fight politically. And I could definitely see where a few countries are just going to say no and they're going to bail out. But that might be okay, because having 28 members, or now 27 members, is probably not doable. But a core of 12? Core of 7 maybe? Yeah. France, Germany, Poland, Holland, Belgium, maybe Italy, pull them together. Yeah, that could work. That could work really well. And so the future of Europe is largely in the hands of those who want it to be in charge. But it's not for the timid. It's going to be hard. All right, let's see if we can just knock a few of these out real quick. You're talking about Americans doing something German. I already asked. Okay. I was brought on a panel of North Countrymen. Talked about the end of history. Yeah. So, I wanted to comment on that real quick. North, is that I think I have one disagreement with Fukuyama's end of history assertion. He said that communism wasn't going to ever be valid. Absolutely agree with that. He thought that the only conclusion was the remainder was basically mixed economy capitalism. I don't think that's 100% right. I think what he left out with the autocratic governments is that the future, if you will, between what is here and what is left over is not that it's a democracy only. It's democracy versus fascism. Because fascism, while being defeated in World War II, didn't really ever die. And this idea keeps coming back over and over and over again. Not to say that communism doesn't try either, but fascism has proven to be a lot more effective, particularly in times of turmoil. And basically, I hate to say this in any kind of way, but the problem with fascism is that in times of instability and economic questioning and political questioning, it's super effective against liberalism. And yeah, I think that's actually the natural antithesis that people can lean into if democracy, liberal democracy, if you will, fails. So yeah, scary, scary stuff. I hope you didn't leave to actually hear that. But okay, let's keep going. Why were Germans arced off? Don't know. I'm sorry, I'm a little behind on the chat. But anyway, European unification would actually happen in the future with French security dominance and German economic dominance. Well, again, the economic picture there is gone. You're going to look at a European Union 10 years from now that it's going to be dominated more by the French than anybody else. And that's not something I think the Germans want, but they might bite for it. Don't know. I'm going to skip over that. Scenario depends. Yeah. Germans, however, far prefer the EU scenario. I don't think they've really been pushed to the point where they have to ask it. The question you have to have here is that Germans like having a sovereign German government that is basically the economic and political center of Europe. But if they don't have control of that economic political center, it's actually Paris. That might change the equation, and particularly if they have to give up a lot of their sovereign independence in favor of a European unity, that's a bit of a different question. I could absolutely see AfD voters shooting through the roof as a result of something that would be seen as that hardline, that communitarian. I'm sure the left would love it largely in Europe. I don't think the right will. And reminder that Germany is largely, outside of Turkey, the most conservative country in Europe, at least of the developed nations. And so, careful. Idea for the future episode: demographic backsliding in European countries like Poland and Hungary. Okay, so just as a quick thing, Sweet Tea, this episode is the German country spotlight, talking about what's going on in Germany. The next one's going to be the geopolitical history of Germany, how it formed, and maybe a little bit of what's going on in the future. The next two episodes, country spotlight history, will be Poland. And so in a general sense, we're going to be hitting that back to back. So yeah, that's going to be fun. Supranational Union. Okay, cool. We agree on that. Europe has no federal government. They technically do. That's the European Commission and part of the European Parliament, which has got like 600 members. The problem is it doesn't have a lot of vested power, and that's going to have to change in a big way if Europe wants to stay united, because they need to be able to be like, no Greece, you're going to have to deal with this. No Germany, you're going to have to deal with this. And no France, you're going to have to deal with this. And that's something that most of the independent nations don't want to deal with. I am rapidly running out of time here. Holy crap. Okay, I've largely caught up with chat. So anyway, I know this was a little bit extra for people that are watching this on YouTube. The last 10 minutes largely has just been interacting with chat. If you're wrong there. I'm sorry, you are wrong. Go away. Okay, anyway, without further ado, sorry, I'm a little pissed. For anyone who's watching this on YouTube, definitely, or if you're watching this, definitely check out all the things. You want to have a chat with me, you want to get involved, definitely. I always encourage people to get involved. Contact me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. That's the ways that you can talk to me. That's the way you can interact with me. When it comes to, if you want to watch all my other content, everything's now on one YouTube channel. You can probably see all the wonderful things that are now built up upon that. So I hope you guys are enjoying that and participating in that. That'd be great. And if you are watching this on YouTube, definitely come check out the chat. Excuse me. I need to fix that. I just realized that. If you are on my, if you're watching this on YouTube, if you want to get involved with Twitch, you can log in, sign in a username. If you don't have one, come watch the show while it's being recorded live. Just hit that follow button. Be great to have you. Sometimes it's a little bit inconsistent on when I stream, which is why the YouTube audience has been growing rapidly, and I thank you for that, but we're not there yet. And so without further ado, this has been an absolute pleasure. Sorry to fight with chat, but sometimes that happens. But I am going to end the recording here. I will have a little bit of an AMA where I get into the details a little bit afterward, but I don't want to do that. I thank everyone for their patronage. I thank everyone for their viewership. And definitely feel free to check out everything else that's been going on throughout... definitely feel free to check out everything that's been going on with all the other content that I'm doing. Be sure to watch out the Geopolitical History episode of Germany coming out here very soon. Until next time, I've been Tyberius D, and we'll catch you next time. Stream is not ending, by the way.